Let's talk about the straightest RPG ever made. It's Video Game Month here on RWA, and we're going to be going over some of the video games that have inspired us most as Dungeon Masters. You can tune in a few weeks to see Joe talk about the Uncharted series, but for today, we're going to be talking about Fallout New Vegas, a game that redefined how I design tabletop campaigns, and a game that I think storytellers of all flavors should go ahead and check out for its rich tapestry of storytelling. If you've played this game before, I hope that this video offers some insight and reflection on some of the things that it did so well, and if you haven't, please worry not. I don't think I'm going to be spoiling anything that will ruin the experience for you, and perhaps it'll be a good insight before you dive in and appreciate what is admittedly now a bit of a clunky, buggy game. But trust me, there is a reason that so many of us keep trying to play it and come up with new builds and new characters to this day, even though it can only run for about 8 minutes on PC. With that said, let's look at 6 things that I believe Fallout New Vegas does right that we can implement at our table. One of the biggest decisions that any dungeon master needs to make is how open of a story is this going to be? Are we in an absolute sandbox, or are we going to be guided along like we're playing through a movie? Most campaigns are somewhere in between, but figuring out what kind of story you're telling and where it lies on this spectrum is an essential choice in making sure that you and the players are all getting what you want out of this game. Number 1, framing the story. Fallout New Vegas is an open-world RPG, much like all of the other Fallout titles, but I think it does a few interesting things that put it right in the middle of this linear to sandbox spectrum. You're never on rails, but the story does have a frame, and that frame flavors a lot of what the players will do. So let's paint the scene. At the start of New Vegas' story, you are a courier who has just had your latest package, a mysterious platinum casino chip, stolen from you, and you were shot in the head and barely survived by the same man who stole it. You know very little about this person, but you do know that you need to get your package back, and perhaps give this person some comeuppance for, shooting you in the head. You find out quickly that this person who shot you is in New Vegas, the city that was previously Vegas, and is now, it's been a few hundred years, you get it. Trying to get to this man and get your package back is reason enough for your character to go here, but there's a lot more going on besides just that. This main hook quickly evolves as you learn how much is at stake in the region and how much conflict is in the city of New Vegas itself. As it turns out, the city of New Vegas is at the center of a major conflict between 2 warring factions: the bureaucratic mess that is the New California Republic, and the imperialistic slaver society that is the Legion. Both of them are going to duke it out any day now to gain control of the region. And a third person, Mr. House, the autocrat that currently runs the city, is interested in maintaining his control. Thus, your story begins in 2 layers. On the immediate surface level layer, you are a courier looking to get your package back. And on the second layer, while you're on the way to do that, you're learning about the deeper political conflict in this region and slowly realizing that you will eventually have a horse in this race no matter what you do. The people who end up controlling Fallout New Vegas might have a lot to do with what you do with that platinum casino chip when you finally get it back. Now, this alone is just great advice for setting up a story or campaign of any kind. You have a surface level layer that immediately hooks your player with strong emotional motivation and clear goals. This guy shot you. Go to New Vegas. And you have a deeper layer that can slowly rise to the surface. Things that won't hook the players immediately, like nuanced political conflicts between 2 factions that both have their flaws, but will eventually, with enough context, get the players interested and get them to engage with the story in a more complicated level. But the truly impressive thing about New Vegas as a game is the painstaking lengths it goes to make sure that everything fits inside this frame. Because while it is technically an open world RPG, everything feels deliberate. Because every action, every location, every character and quest and decision eventually comes back to this central conflict. Who gets to control New Vegas? This is the beauty of the game to me. You are technically free to do anything. You are never railed into action at any point. But everything you do will eventually come back to a key, somewhat linear story that is going on. That random gang you just stumbled into? Well, it turns out they were kicked off of their land by the NCR. This random NPC that you just talked to buy a gun. Turns out he used to be enslaved by the Legion and has escaped. The game positions itself right in the middle of the linear to sandbox spectrum by making sure that whatever aimless wandering you do, and I as a player tend to do a lot of it, it will always lead back. The structure is a little bit like a sketch of a Christmas tree. There are wide parts that you're allowed to engage with, and then there are occasional linear gates. You have to get to New Vegas at some point, but you can basically wander around and do it in any way you would like. Then once you do that, there's the business of getting the chip, and that's another big open section that slowly narrows in, and on until the story ends. And with this perfect balance, by putting everything within the frame of the central conflict, you are allowed to do whatever you want. But no matter what you're doing, you feel like you're contributing to the main story. So in an open and unpredictable game like D&D, perhaps something like this is the ideal structure. Can we think of a central conflict that's going on in our campaign and make sure that all of our open world activities have some small correlation to this event? It's an opinionated person that's involved, or the fallout of a faction, or some bad side of who you thought were previously good people that can unfold based on a side quest. If there is a big conflict at the center of your campaign that casts a shadow over everything else, your players will not feel discouraged from exploring, but will also feel like no matter how much random mucking about they do, they are eventually contributing to a bigger core narrative that they're going to care about. With this structure, you can get the best of both worlds. You can tell your players, for example, you need 5,000 gold to be welcomed into this part of town, and then let them figure it out. But trust that however they figure it out, they're going to be engaging with your main story in some way. And by the time they finally get that $5,000 or are allowed into the next threshold, they're going in with all the more context and are all the more ready to engage with the main plot. Number 2, guidance without restriction. Now that we have that structure outlined, our Christmas tree, if you will, we can talk about guidance. How often and to what extent does New Vegas offer guidance for the player to interact with the main story? In what ways do they do this? Well, at the very beginning of the game, your goal is very simple as stated, get to New Vegas. And there is an NPC that offers 2 basic routes to you. There's a short way, a path that leads basically directly there, but is a no man's land inhabited by some of the toughest creatures in the game. And then there's a highway that goes all the way around a long way. You really got to go miles and miles out of your way, days and days of travel to get there, but it will be relatively safe. And along the way, you can gather resources and supplies and learn about the area you're in, maybe even eventually getting more information on the man who stole your chip. But other than that, that's about the only guidance you are given on how to get to New Vegas. It is up to you if you want to do one or the other, or some in-between thing where you just wander around, find a cave, fight a gang, do a quest. The thing is, most players are going to eventually end up doing the second option, the intended option, if you will, the one that introduces you more thoroughly to the world, sets up more quests, lets you get more XP, and see more of the cool things that the developers made, which I'm sure any dungeon master can relate to that feeling. But how does the game know that the players are going to do this with only one little instance of guidance? What's stopping them from going forward? Well, In addition to the guidance, the game offers consequences. This is not foolproof, of course, but it is something that we can implement at the table as well. Guidance is something that is offered from NPCs or hints and clues throughout the world, and consequences are something that happen when a player goes down a path that is ill-advised. Now, it is not our job as the Dungeon Master to put up our foot and stop them from doing that thing, or to be upset with them when they fuck around and find out, for lack of a better term. But what we can do is offer guidance and consequences in an attempt to illustrate to them that this world is not going to bend to their will, that there are forces out there more powerful than them, bad courses of action to take no matter how smart or powerful they are, and that if they are going to make it through the campaign intact, it might be worth planning a little bit, finding some more insight, and listening to the expertise of the people around them. And by having the confidence to let the player mess up, New Vegas is able to offer guidance and consequences without any restriction. There's no literal gates or invisible walls in the world that say you can't go here yet. There's no alert that says this is a leveled zone and you cannot come here until you're level 25. Nothing like that actually takes away any control. You are free to do whatever you would like in the sandbox, but as we discussed in part 1, everything will eventually come back to that core. And the core is guiding you to one particular direction. You can interpret that however you would like, but I think the strength of the game is how it's able to guide people who want to follow that path without directly telling them what to do. And it's able to offer a hell of a challenge to people that want to resist that path no matter what. Now, as far as consequences go, New Vegas just murders you whenever you mess up because it's a game where you can reload saves. D&D is very often not like that, so I would recommend we think of other things to be consequences. But I still think this is a worthwhile lesson that we can take. Maybe instead of outright death, a companion is killed. Or maybe instead of being killed by an enemy, they're captured and have to come up with some sort of escape. Maybe they lose a valuable resource. Maybe they run out of time to accomplish something because of hang-ups that come along the way. Just like the framed story structure of the game, this guidance without restriction offers a pitch-perfect balance between sandbox play and linear storytelling. We are able to deeply invest in the world because we know that it is going to take itself seriously, and there will be real consequences if we don't take it seriously. But we also are never directly told what to do and where to go. We are allowed to wander as we please, and if we want to come up with a way to do that short, quick, and dangerous path, we certainly can. And it is possible in New Vegas at level 1 to get through that short path. It's just very, very hard. With these two things combined, you as a Dungeon Master can let your players combat situations however they would like. But you can do that while simultaneously holding on to some semblance of control. You can have a bit of an idea of what's going to be happening in your campaign moment to moment and week to week because you have found this perfect balance, just like the game. Tell the players where they need to go, but let them get there however they would like. Tell them what the NPCs of the world think would be best, but let them ignore or heed that advice as they wish. Let them do dangerous things and face the consequences. These are the ways that you create a believable world and a story that continues to move forward, guided by the choices that the players make of their own volition. Number 3, making every skill matter. Like most RPGs, Fallout New Vegas has a speech skill that allows you to converse your way through difficult situations, convince people of your opinions, corral people's emotions, and so on. But unlike a lot of RPGs, it is far from the only skill that influences how you communicate. In fact, every single skill on your character's profile in Fallout New Vegas can come up in conversation in ways that a simple silver tongue wouldn't be able to. Sometimes knowledge in a particular field is more important than how well you can word yourself. For example, there are instances in the game where having a high science skill lets you explain to somebody how the computers work somewhere, or having a high medicine skill allows you to convince somebody that you know what you're talking about when it comes to bodily anatomy. Very early in the game, there's an opportunity to get dynamite from one of the townfolk, and you need a 25 in explosives in order to convince him to hand it over. I really like this detail because, for one, if you picked explosive when you were making your character, it makes it really feel like it mattered. And for two, it implies that this NPC is not the kind of man who really cares if you have the gift of gab or not. He just wants to know that you're not going to blow up your thumb. And no amount of flashy words is going to convince him of that. You need to demonstrate a knowledge of how this device works. The end result is that you can play a character in Fallout New Vegas that has terrible speech, but is still able to get through conversations and have influence on social encounters in a meaningful way. And this is the part of it that I think we can bring over to D&D. This makes every skill you invest in worth itself twofold. It's not only useful when you're actually out in the field using the skill, but it's useful when you're off the field talking to people and sorting out information, which is a lot of what New Vegas is, and a lot of what modern D&D campaigns are, social heavy, character driven. When skills are viewed this way in D&D, not only can every class contribute something in combat encounters, but they can contribute something in the other two pillars as well, using their skills. The barbarian and fighter and rogue aren't just waiting around for the next combat encounter to do their cool thing. They also have some contributions to the other parts of the game. And sure, your bard or sorcerer or whatever might still be the face of the group, but the rest of them can offer very meaningful contributions and aid based on their expertise, not just also having a high charisma skill with persuasion, deception, and so on. There's a couple ways I've thought of to implement this kind of flavor at my table. One is to occasionally allow non-charismatic classes to use other skills for roles in situations where it applies. For example, if you're haggling with a shopkeep about an herbal supplement, perhaps it makes sense to use your medicine check to explain that actually, I know what this herb does and it's not worth what you're charging, as opposed to a persuasion check to plead your case. Another trick I've come up with is what I'm calling passive skill checks. The passive numbers for perception and insight are something that we write down on the character sheet from the beginning, because these are number games. These are things we need to know at the table to see if a sneaking enemy has been detected or if a lying NPC has been figured out. But I like to imagine that with proficiency in a skill, these passive thresholds are happening all the time. That your characters are able to notice things and have insights based on their expertise, even when they aren't specifically rolling for them. To implement this, I like to write down what every PC in my party is proficient in at the start of a campaign and use it to guide my narration. For example, I might tell the ranger specifically that with your proficiency in nature, you notice that the plant life in this dungeon seems to all be various poisonous species, and then that might have some implication on the life forms going forward. Or perhaps I could tell the rogue, with your sleight of hand knowledge, you notice that the barmaid you're talking to right now is twiddling her thumbs and working those copper pieces very dexterously in a way that implies to someone with your keen eye that maybe there's more to her than meets the eye. Doing things like this not only gets those players involved more directly in the scene rather than just hanging out in the back while the charisma character does their thing, it also helps them roleplay and makes it feel like the skills they picked really matter. That athletics isn't just important when you're jumping, religion isn't just important when you're praying, and so on. By letting every skill affect dialogue like in New Vegas, we get the entire party involved and perhaps change the flow of the conversation based on knowledge that the face of the party would not have. It gets everybody involved, it helps them get in the mindset of their character, it makes them feel like their skill investments matter, and if they do want to dig deeper and actually make a skill check based on information they received, that's all the better. Number 4. Dialectics and opinionated NPCs. At some point on your quest to find the missing platinum chip, you're probably going to end up talking to Caesar, or Caesar as he's called within the Legion, and learn more about his way of thinking. How does he justify the things that he's doing? Well, his core philosophy is what I think is basically the core design philosophy of the entire game. It's dialectics, or in other words, the truth that lies in between two opposing concepts. For those unfamiliar with the concept, the idea is that if you take two opposing ideas and let them duke it out, as it were, that you can arrive at a more nuanced and complete truth somewhere in the middle, the best parts of both, by listening to two extremes. Caesar believes that a society put against its direct opposite will eventually arrive at a third better society based on the best parts of both. And in this way, he thinks that his war with the NCR is justified because eventually, no matter who ends up winning, it will benefit the people of the region because these two opposing forces made each other better through their conflict and ended up synthesizing into something great. Now, before we apply this logic to our own game design, I do want to acknowledge that we should take Caesar's arguments with a grain of salt. For one, he cites Hegel as his main inspiration, and for reasons that are beyond the scope of this video, he has a pretty simplified and hackneyed understanding of Hegel. And the other reason is that he keeps slaves. He keeps slaves. So I don't want to encourage you to use dialectics to justify his nonsense, but I do want to encourage you to think about dialectics when you're designing complicated conflicts in your world. It's not just good or bad. It's not just the truth or the lie. It's something in the middle that the players have to sort out on their own. There are no good guys in New Vegas, really. There certainly are some bad guys, but the main antagonist is really the setting. And the conflict that arises is all of the people trying to deal with it. How do we run a system of government 200 plus years into a nuclear apocalypse? Should it be like the past? Should it be like the distant past, like Rome? Or should it be something entirely new? Should we synthesize it into something else? And the game conveys this complexity with some of the most opinionated NPCs I've ever encountered in any open-world RPG. People willing to tell you exactly what they think about the political systems and factions at play, the circumstances of the world, and what you should be doing to change it. And after synthesizing dozens of these opinions, the player is left to their own devices, because, as you will eventually come to find in your playthrough of New Vegas, who controls the city is partially up to you. Now, D&D is a high fantasy game, and there often is a big bad. There's only so much nuance to a demon lord that enjoys eating children or something. But this general concept that the truth lies somewhere in the middle of dozens or hundreds of half-truths is something that I recommend employing at the table if you want to tell a longer form, more mature story. So perhaps your big bad is simple, like an evil vampire lord, and there's not much nuance to them beyond that. That might be well and good. But think of ways you can introduce nuance around your big bad. For example, what if some of the legal and political and wealth-based systems that this vampire duke or whatever has put into position have actually benefited some people? And if you remove this vampire lord from power, some perfectly good, perfectly innocent people are now going to struggle to get by or have resources taken from them because of your actions. Or what if there's a group of vampire hunters whose latest project has been hunting down this antagonist that your party is after, but upon closer inspection, the inner politics of this hunting group is so corrupt and messed up that they're almost as bad as the creatures they're hunting, and maybe it's not worth engaging with them. And what if this vampire lord being in power is actually the most stable this region has been in hundreds of years, and killing them will introduce a power vacuum that some believe will actually benefit nobody, and throw this region into another decades-long bout of chaos? These are all just ideas, but the main idea is that whatever you end up doing with dialectics, no one NPC should have the whole truth. This really encourages your players to dig in, to wade their way through the middle. And perhaps they'll never arrive at a super clear answer on what that middle is, but by the time they start making decisions, they'll feel like they've really had to think about it and piece together multiple perspectives. They'll feel like they're the ones with the unique insight as the heroes of this story to know what to do, because they've absorbed so many other perspectives and experiences around this issue. To put it simply, when there isn't a right answer, the answer that your players are going to come up with can be very interesting. Just use something like Dialectics to give them the permission to come up with it. Number 5. Quests that defy simplicity. Alright, we've talked a lot of theory. Let's talk meat and potatoes. Quests. How does this game handle quests? Well, I'm kidding. We'll talk about it. Now, the primary thing that all the quests in New Vegas do well is the first 4 things we talked about. They fit in some way into the broader picture. They offer guidance on how to solve them without directly telling you what to do or forcing your hand. There are multiple solutions that involve just about every skill that your character could possibly have, and there's often some layer of complication about them where there's no clear right or wrong answer. In addition to this, they use the 2 layers storytelling idea that we discussed earlier as well. There's usually something that hooks you right away at the start of the quest that's easy to understand, and then something that comes up about halfway through the quest that you weren't originally aware of that changes everything. Something complicated, deeper, and harder to untangle. When it comes to looking at video games to get inspiration, quests are some of the most direct. You could probably straight up just take the design of some of the quests in New Vegas and run a great session or 2 based on them. And to that end, I'm just going to quickly list what I think are some of the best in the game, and you can see if there's something that might inspire something in your game. Listen, I know this is now a list inside of a list. We're not going to go any deeper than that, okay? We're going to be fine. Okay, we're going to be fine. I'll hold your hand. Sublime! The whitewash. Something has happened to the water supply at an NCR farmland, which is choking out the crops. This is your hook. Go figure out what's happening to the water supply and see if any criminal activity has been committed. It turns out crimes have been committed, but they were committed by a man from an underserved community, somebody that the NCR should be supplying water to, but is not. And he committed these crimes in order to pull this off and get away with it and supply his people with water so they could live. From here, there's probably a half dozen things that the player can do. They can let this guy go and lie about the crime. They can reprimand this guy for the crime. They can outright kill him if they think that that's an appropriate punishment for that. I would question that, but you're allowed to do that. The beauty of quests like this one is that they take the most stereotypically good faction, the New California Republic, and they add some complication to the inner workings of the system. The bureaucratic hell, all of the cutting of the pie and gerrymandering and annexing and disenfranchising that happens in that group and the people that suffer because of it. And it makes you question as the player, is this just a bad thing that I need to contend with but still support them because they're the best option? Or is this enough of a reason to sever my ties and support a different faction in the story? And by adding nuance to the air quote good guys in this way, it makes the player ask what is probably one of the most political questions ever. Do I work to improve the status quo, or do I fight to change the status quo? Even if your players still end up supporting the good guys in your campaign, something like this can take a very simple faction and add a lot more depth, and make your players make some real choices when it comes to who they want to align themselves with. Next quest is Ghost Town Gunfight. This is actually the quest that starts the whole game, basically. The town that you wake up in after getting shot in the head, remember that, you were shot in the head, is about to be raided by a gang. And it's up to you whether you want to round up the town and fight them off, join the gang and get what you can scavenging the people here, or leave. Walk off into the sunset as a third party. This is probably one of the best quests in the game for the making every skill matter idea that we discussed. There are so many allies that you can get on your side and different ways that you can get them based on skills that you might not expected to have an influence on the conversation part of the game. But the real good part of this quest to me is the consequences, because when this attack happens, whoever dies, dies. It's technically possible for the player to be the only survivor in this absolute bloodbath. And this is a way to add serious consequences to a quest that don't put the story to a complete halt. This quest establishes early on the basic philosophy of New Vegas. here is a problem, solve it how you would like, and here are some consequences, deal with them for the rest of the game. A quest like this at the beginning of a D&D game can offer a spectrum of failure and victory conditions, letting the players know that some things might fall out of their grasp and the story will press on anyhow, and that there are many things they'll need to consider in order to succeed. Next quest is Arizona Killer. Kill the president. Well, that's the plot hook of the quest. I'm not saying that you should, like, kill the... Oh, shit. Oh, no. Oh, I'm talking about a game. Caesar, Kaiser, wants you to kill the NCR president while he's giving a speech in order to affect morale. He's such a good guy. There are some scripted options for this that you can discover, but there's infinite possibilities, limited only by the combat engine, that you can do otherwise. Blow everybody up. Snipe them from a tower, shoot them with plasma rays, have your companions take them out, start some sort of ruckus between everybody, whatever you want to do, really. This is basically a level of Hitman inside Fallout. And I think implementing a similar level of here is a problem, find your own solution to our players can be a lot of fun. There can be some solutions that are more scripted, if you will, paths that they can discover on their own. But there's also just a bunch of loose odds and ends and their own ideas that they can throw at it to get this very simple but difficult goal accomplished. Do they try to do this professionally as possible and end up in nail-biting situations where it almost goes wrong? Or do they just cause as much havoc as they want? It's entirely up to them. But once again, you can use guidance and consequences without restriction in order to enforce this kind of quest. And finally, we'll talk about Beyond the Beef, a quest in which you trail a missing persons case to a casino, only to find out that a member of that casino is trying to get the gang back into cannibalism again. And the missing person is somebody that he captured to eat. Yikes! This quest is the prime rib example of offering as many choices to the player as you possibly can. There are so many little wrinkles and complications in this marbled meat of a quest, all right, I'm done, that you can go ahead and do as the player. Do you rescue the missing person and save them from their fate? Do you expose the gang for their corruption? Do you just take them on, guns blazing? Do you replace the missing person with one of your companions? Oh, you monster. Do you participate in the cannibalism? Because that's a thing you can do in New Vegas. It's literally a perk. You can get better at cannibalism. This quest is the perfect example of the two layers idea. The hook of find a missing person is not what this quest becomes, but it's what gets you involved. It's the way that you are brought into this more complex world so that the deeper layers can slowly unfold themselves to you while you're already in it and doing something and have a clear goal to go after. By the end of the quest, you're still going to be doing basically what you started at. You're either going to succeed or fail at finding this missing person. But the way it shapes up is not going to be what you thought at all. It's a lot more complicated than that. So we talked about structure, and we talked about quests that implement them. And now, let's talk about putting it all together. How Fallout New Vegas takes all of these things and makes everything matter.
Part 6. Making it all matter.
In most open-world RPGs, the conclusion of the game is just the conclusion of the main story. All that other stuff you did with that rebel faction or that mages guild, all of those random caves you explored, they didn't really have anything to do with where we ended up. But in New Vegas, they do, because of that frame we talked about, that Christmas tree structure. All of your wandering adds up to the final battle in a way that is incredibly satisfying and something I haven't experienced in almost any other game. All that aimless wandering you did for the past 30 to 50 hours ends up coming back at the Hoover Dam. That faction that you made some inroads with might come to help you. That weird group that keeps bomber jets might join you and send a bomber jet. There are so many little details that end up showing up that remind you of decisions you made hours and hours ago. And it makes it feel like it all matters. Every single little thing you did affected this fateful day. Because even though the world was open, everybody has a stake in this fight, one way or another. It will affect everybody on that big open world map who is running this city. And when you offer them the chance to help and actually sway things in whatever direction you as the player choose, a lot of people are willing to hop on. In this way, the ending of Fallout New Vegas feels equally like an ending that was written by the developers and an ending that was discovered by you. You wandered around, you ended up doing things that you didn't plan on doing just by stumbling into quests and factions and areas, and it comes back. None of it was talk. The allegiances you made and the favors you did and the quests you completed caused these people to behave differently at the end of the game. And this, to me, offers an absolute gold standard for a campaign of D&D. A game that is narrative-focused, but guided without being restrictive. A game where your open-world wandering about is encouraged and all comes back in the end. A game where every decision matters. Both D&D and Fallout New Vegas are collaborative storytelling experiences where your input as a player genuinely matters. And to really bring that feeling home, I think it helps to take inspiration from the Battle of Hoover Dam and make sure that moments that came up organically or that you weren't planning on as the DM throughout the story can find a way to have some effect, big or small, on the final conflict that your players will be involved in. And with those 6 things combined, I hope I've made a case for why Dungeon Masters should play this game, for why this game has stood the test of time, and people still talk about it to this day as an exemplary example of narrative gaming done right. Ever since playing this game, I've thought about how to provide frameworks to an open story, how to guide without restrict, how to make every skill my players invest in matter, how to surround them with NPCs that don't just influence their stats and their ability to fight through encounters and give them loot, but truly influence their thoughts on the world around them. How to make quests that hook them, and how to think of an ending that ties all of it together and makes every little decision count. All of that makes Fallout New Vegas easily my pick for the Dungeon Master Vidya game, the one that anybody running a game of D&D should check out at some point to see if there's something in it that inspires them. If you like that, we make videos like this every few weeks on this channel between Joe and I. We also live play our D&D campaigns on Twitch, and then they get uploaded onto YouTube. We have 3 campaigns going in total right now, 2 run by Joe and 1 run by John. We have many other videos on the channel as well, and we are currently developing an original playing card game called Kingdoms and Castles, based on the lore of Joe's homebrew setting of Illica. If you're interested in that and any more of it, please stick around to see what we do next. And I will see you next month for another weird take